but we here at the University of Mary offer our warm Benedictine hospitality to all of you. Our speaker today is one who exemplifies not only our Benedictine spirit and value of hospitality, but that of servant leadership. Taking the example of Jesus, the true servant leader, to heart, Sister Thomas serves in ways that gives meaning and value to others. Sister Thomas is a Benedictine sister of Annunciation Monastery, and she began her career at the University of Mary as the choir director, and then moved into development until she was named president in 1978. She was not here in 1878. Today, as President Emerita, she continues her work in development, and she is also the chair of the monastery's sponsorship council, and she also directs the choir at the monastery as well. And so Sister Thomas has a wealth of knowledge and experience when it comes to living a life of servant leadership. Today, she'll visit with us about being called to leadership and service. So please let us welcome Sister Thomas Welder.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sister Nancy, for that introduction that was way too kind and a surprise. If my mom was still living, she'd be sitting in the front row and saying, "Yep, but she can't cook and she doesn't play bridge." But even with those serious limitations, I have been somewhat of a student of leadership, and so I did go back to my leadership file just thinking, well, when did I first start talking about? I actually found a talk that I gave in 1995, and I was talking about leadership and vision and that kind of thing, so I'm thinking, wow, 20 years ago, what else was going on 20 years ago? So I did do a little research. Clinton was still in his first term as president. There wasn't such a thing as social media. If you wanted a mobile phone, and it was still an analog kind of device, Taylor Swift was in kindergarten, and Monsignor Shea was a teenager. It's just such a privilege to be here, and I thank you for your presence. For a moment when our dean asked the students to stand, I thought, I hope he doesn't say, how many of you have to be here? I'm delighted. Thank you very much to all of you. The former president of Princeton, William Bowen, in his recent book on the digital age, he tells the story of Jeff Bezos. Now, Bezos, founder and the CEO of Amazon. And evidently, when Bezos was just a little guy, preschooler, he figured out how much time, with 2 minutes per puff, his grandmother was shortening her life by smoking. He was so excited about his calculation, he goes to tell her, and of course his grandma bursts into tears. But the grandfather took it as a teachable moment, and he said to his little grandson, "One day you'll learn that it's harder to be kind than it is to be clever." We all have gifts. What was Grandpa really saying? I think he was saying that whatever our gifts might be, some of us in this audience I know have unusual stamina. Some of you, you're great adapters to change. Some of you are tremendous in terms of organization or conceptualization. Some of you have perfect pitch. Whatever our gifts might be, I think everyone in this room is inclined to be outgoing and generous in behalf of others. But natural gifts can be overrated. What matters comes to what it is that we value and the choices we make. The Harvard Business Review has just named their 100 best CEOs in this country based on financial returns, based on how happy their shareholders are. And Jeff Bezos has been ranked as number 1. I'm guessing if you went to Bezos today and said, or asked, where's Amazon going to be in 5 years? He might not know. But something he does know, and something that he would tell you, was that lesson years ago from his grandfather shaped his life. It shaped his view of the world. And here's what Bezos says himself today. He says, cleverness is a gift. Kindness is a choice. Gifts are easy. Choices can be hard. That learning, I think, applies to our topic today, called to leadership and service. Everyone in this room has a willingness to be of service. The challenge comes with that call to leadership. That choice can be hard. The strengths and talents that we each have are God's gifts. We haven't earned them. And unless we're still in that self-centered place of adolescence, and believe me, I can slip back to that pretty quickly, but we know that God has given us these gifts to share, to develop, and to serve the needs of a world that's much larger than ourselves. How do we see the world? If we have an other-centered view of the world, we have specific values. If we have a self-centered view of the world, here's how Anaïs Nin, a French-American author, puts it. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. God calls us. We're called to become servant leaders. More and more you hear that word vocation, which comes from the Latin word vocare, which means to call. I believe that if we develop a greater consciousness of that idea of call, then our work becomes more than a job. If we can say, when we wake up in the morning, I'm called to this day, I'm called to this job, we become more engaged in our work. We become, in a sense, we become stewards of the heritage of our organization, our company, our product, whatever it might be, because we become more and more motivated by mission. And we find words to talk about our corporations or our teams or our school's vision. We develop a kind of sense of community, relationships with those we serve, our colleagues, our customers, our clients, our citizens, whoever it is that we serve. But we always come back to the question, do I have the will to listen to God's call and then to choose, not always what's easy, but what's often hard? What matters most for the well-being of others? I like a lot what Frederick Buechner, Presbyterian minister, writer, author, what he says about vocation. He talks about it as the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness, where your giftedness, where your passion, and the deep hungers of the world meet. Where your deep passion, your deep giftedness, and the hungers of the world meet. Think about who you are and what you do. If your gifts match the needs you are meeting on behalf of others, that place is where you are called to be. And that's the place for us to talk about servant leadership. The phrase was coined by a gentleman by the name of Robert Greenleaf. Greenleaf died in 1990, but I was fortunate enough to show up at a conference and actually had an opportunity to meet him. He's had an interesting background. He was with AT&T for 40 years, and he was largely in management and in training. And in the course, in that role at AT&T, he began to realize that the model of leadership we all know well simply was not meeting the complex human needs of society today. And he was committed to do everything he could to somehow or other to begin making a change. When I talk about the model of leadership we're all accustomed to, at least I immediately think of the pyramid with a CEO sitting on the top and then hierarchical layers. So you've got executive vice presidents, directors, management, and the customers at the bottom. And Greenleaf is asking, now, what is wrong with this picture? And that isn't the only, it's not just in business. We can say the same thing about service in healthcare, government. It's typically that top-down command control approach. The challenge with that approach is it's the kind of model where it's easy to treat people as things. It's a model where it's so easy to treat people as things. The interesting thing is that as hard as many people have worked in trying to change that model, the model persists. I just read a journal 3 days ago, and they were interviewing some new business people, and these kids, they're kids, they had just graduated from Harvard School of Business, and they're starting a very interesting nonprofit. And here's what they're calling it, MBAs across America. So the question, of course, is why did you come up with this concept? What are you trying to do? And now I'm going to quote one of these young men. He said, "We are trying to write a new field manual for business across America. It can't be about hierarchy. Leaders sitting in the corner office and going to the Hamptons while everyone else is pressing sheet metal. It can't be just pursuing quarterly earnings. Leaders can't just say, let's do this because it optimizes efficiency. There's got to be a larger vision for our future and for us. There's got to be a larger vision for our future and for us." Now, way back in the 70s, here's what the conclusion Greenleaf came to, and I quote him. He said, "I finally realized that the great leader is seen as servant first. The great leader is seen as servant first." And then he said, and that simple fact is the key to the leader's greatness. Jesus, the servant leader par excellence, you remember in the gospel, he gets a little exasperated with the disciples. They're starting to talk about who's the greatest. Who's the greatest among us? And Jesus said, you know what? You're just like the rest. Rather, Jesus said, rather, whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant. Whoever wishes to be great among you shall be seen as your servant. So in 1970, Greenleaf came out with a little essay, and he titled it "The Servant is Leader." So this is 1970. And here's how he then, at that point, how he talked about servant leadership. The servant leader is servant first, and then he's got this rather benevolent view of human nature. He said it begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first, and then a conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. Service is not the default mode of leadership. At the University of Mary, we believe every student has the capacity to become a leader. You don't have to be born a leader. It doesn't have to be in your gene pool. Although some students of Leadership Forever, Kouzes and Posner, say, you know what, we never met a leader who wasn't born. But at Mary, we say you grow into leadership through service. You'll notice this was an opinion column by one of our students back in 2007, Rachel, and she was confused. She came as a freshman. We talk about servant leadership, and she said, it can't be. A servant is someone who nobody pays any attention to, and the leader is always in the spotlight. To Rachel, it was an oxymoron until one day she witnessed in her residence hall floor a student. She didn't know her that well, but she wasn't an RA, she wasn't an RD. She started taking care of another student who had become sick. They didn't know each other, but this young woman stepped out of her comfort zone and went to make sure that she was taken care of. That blew Rachel away. The skills of a servant leader are definable. They're teachable. They are observable practices modeled by countless servant leaders. I'm guessing everyone here models some of those skills. The truth is that the best leaders are the best learners. The best leaders are the best learners. They're listening, they're observing, they're making sure that other people's needs are being met. And I can tell you that Rachel began to aspire to this idea of servant leadership. At the end of the article, she said, you know, what I thought was an oxymoron is something I care about. He said, it's not necessarily what I'm learning in a class, but it's what I'm seeing in action, what I'm seeing in my professors, what I'm seeing in my fellow students. Greenleaf's biggest worry was not evil people, not apathetic people, not people caught up in the system, but people who couldn't or wouldn't make the hard choice. And here's how he says it, I quote, "The enemy is strong, natural leaders who have the potential to lead, but do not lead, or they choose to follow a non-servant." So we're going to talk about just 3 kind of observable, what I think are essential skills for servant leadership. There are a list of skills, many more than 3. So this is not a whole picture by any means, but we'll just pull out three skills, 3 observable skills that I think are essential to this idea of becoming servant leader. Start with listen, influence, and building community. To kind of put them in context, I'm going to tell you a story. Some years back, one of our staff members gave me this wonderful little book, and it was entitled, God Always Has a Plan B. And it looked like a little Hallmark book, and I thought, oh, this is perfect for my niece, Michelle. So I'm going to wrap it up and send it to Michelle. And then I opened it up. My gosh, here's this fantastic story. I've been using it over and over. My niece never saw the book. It seems that there were some American missionaries, and they'd hired a number of native workers to help them carry supplies from one village to the next. And the missionaries were much like any of us. They possessed that kind of American push, rush, let's get going here. So every day, they were verbally prodding their native employees to go a little faster and to go a little farther than they had the day before. And finally, after 3 days of being pushed and hurried, the native workers sat down and they refused to move. The sad thing is that the missionaries hadn't ever caught on. They had no clue. So, I mean, they're like astounded, and they're asking, what's the problem here? We've been making excellent time. There's no need to stop here. Finally, one of the native workers had the courage, and he stood up and he said, "It's not wise to go so rapidly. We have moved too fast yesterday, and now today we must stop and we must wait here for our souls to catch up with our bodies." With all the good intentions in the world, the missionaries were obsessed with this, preaching the gospel, and they were entrapped in that idea that it all depended on them. As servant leaders, and they were servant leaders, absolutely, but they forgot, they forgot that their mission was not about stroking their own egos, but that they were here in this country to take great care, I'm quoting, to make sure that others' needs were served first. They were too busy to listen to the needs of their co-workers. They were too distracted to be able to influence or inspire them. They were too stressed to connect the dots between mission and building community amongst those they needed most. In short, the missionaries had allowed themselves to become walking corpses. The truth was in the words of the workers. We must stop and wait here for our souls to catch up with our bodies. I think it's just the perfect definition of a vacation or a retreat. Nearly every world religion insists on the wisdom of finding regular intervals to hit the pause, to block out noise, and to tune into that small voice within that calls us to something bigger than ourselves. I'm suggesting that calls us to servant leadership. We, as servant leaders, we're always striving toward wholeness. I mean, that's part of growth. That's part of the maturation, that integrating of mind, body, and spirit. Life and business can't be separated. Who wants to live the divided life, where you're one person at home, and then you're forced to be another person when you get into your professional setting? Think again of the missed opportunities of the American missionaries. Carving out time in our busy lives for reading, for reflecting, for praying, helps us become more mindful of what really matters. what really matters, how important our family is to us, how important it is to be developing relationships with our neighbors. And it expands our capacity to listen in a way that helps others find their own wholeness. Now, I was blown away. This would have been a while back, but I was reading a little bit about the PepsiCo company, and I can't even say the CEO's name, so I apologize for that, but it's Indra, maybe it's Noyi, it's Noryi. But she operates under a mission that she calls performance with purpose. Mission, performance with purpose. And she's got 3 pillars, but one of the pillars has to do with people. Now, you think about it, PepsiCo, 270,000 employees. Here's what she said. I mean, it was so practical, I'm like blown away, but it was profound. She said, how do we at PepsiCo create an environment where everybody can bring their whole selves to work? And practical, she added to that, it would help with recruiting and retention. How can we create an environment in which our employees can come to work every day and bring their whole selves? They can be themselves. Oh, the skills. That's for the students who have a test. There you go. Write them down fast, okay. Thomas Merton, the famous Trappist monk, talks about this idea of wholeness. He talks about learn to live as a unified human person. This means that you have to bring back together the fragments of your distracted existence so that when you say I, there is really someone present to support the pronoun you've uttered. Now, to give some focus to our understanding of servant leadership, I ask you to visualize a triangle. And at the base of the triangle, we're going to put the word credibility. And then, as you see, one angle vision, the other angle service. And I suggest this only as a framework to help us as we think about these 3 skills that I see as helpful to the servant leader: listen, influence, and build community. I mentioned Kouzes and Posner a little bit earlier. James Kouzes actually has been in Bismarck, I think maybe twice, but they've come out with their 5th edition of their book. It's called The Challenge to Leadership. They've been engaged in leadership research, I think, for almost 30 years. And now I quote them. They say, we keep rediscovering that credibility is the foundation of leadership. It's been reinforced so often that we've come to refer to it as the first law of leadership. Basically, what it means is people won't believe the message if they don't believe in the messenger. People don't follow your technique. They don't give a hoot about your leadership style. There are as many styles as there are leaders. They're not impressed with titles. They're not impressed with position. They follow you. Your message and the way you live that message. In short, people do what people see. If they hear you say one thing and they see you do another, and think of this in terms of your children or your grandchildren, if they see you do another, you have lost all credibility in their eyes. This new generation of MBAs, this new generation of engineers and business leaders, they get it. They're starting to talk about, how can I find my mission? How does our company, how does our product find its mission? And here I'm quoting one of the new leaders in our country. He says, for investors and for employees, it comes down to a question of trust. Is the connection between what makes it a great business and what gives it a compelling mission, is that connection authentic? Do you have a great business, and the greatness of the business comes about because you're living the mission? You live the mission. What kind of a CEO are people looking for? When people say we're on a search for a new CEO, and if you went to the employees and said, what are your expectations? What are your hopes for the new CEO of your organization? What would they say? Well, I go back to Kouzes and Posner again. This was more of their research. And they've been, as I said, many, many years. I remember when Kouzes was here, we all took his survey. And it's neat. It's kind of like attributes you expect from a leader. And then there are a list of maybe 20, 30 attributes. And then you fill out those attributes that you think are the most important. Well, putting all of that together, they travel internationally. I can't tell you how many surveys they've taken, how many focus groups. 60% of the time, people of all races, all ethnic groups, all across the world, or around the world, I should say, 60% of the time, not 100, but 60% of the time, they say, here's what we hope for in a leader. We hope, first of all, that the leader is competent in their area. You know, if they're business, they're in healthcare, they're in education, we expect competence. The second thing, and these are not, I should say, they're not in order of importance. Honesty. We want someone who's fair. Then they look for someone who has a vision, who knows where we're headed, where we're going. And finally, somebody who inspires them. Somebody who, when they see them, they see the mission in that person. They see values embodied in the leader. Wonderful little anecdote. A new CEO had just been named, and the chairman of the board, was talking to him, and they were just going to the press conference. And here's the last thing he said to him before he went to the press conference. He said, you know, we can give you the crown. We can give you the crown, but we can't make you king. To become the leader, you must earn the trust of those you serve. They make you leader. They make you king. They give you the authority. Leadership is a process, it's a learning experience, it has nothing to do with a title or living in the C-suite. You gain credibility, not through position or title, but through service and sacrifice. Through service and sacrifice. The premier skill of the true servant leader is listen first. Listen first. Now, we as Benedictines, we think that's great, because our founder, Benedict, who lived way back in the 6th century, wrote a little blueprint for living in community. And the first word, the prologue, the very first word of the Rule of Benedict says, listen, my son or daughter, with the ear of your heart. Listen to the words of the Master with the ear of your heart. Benedict was saying, be fully present and be humble, be open to hear what is said. God, each other, the prioress, to stay open. We listen first. So for Greenleaf, he said, no matter what the issue, where the place, the automatic response of the leader is to listen, because that causes the leader to be seen as servant first, to be seen as someone you can trust, as someone who is credible. If you think about it, when you're visiting with someone, and I have to work at this, if you are actively listening, I have to say to myself, okay, Thomas, don't worry about tonight. Don't think who's coming next. I want to be fully present to this person who respects me enough to even come and visit with me. So to be fully present, it's a discipline. It's a discipline. It is a sacrifice, because we're gifting each other with time. Time is the greatest gift in a sense because it's irrevocable. You'll never get it back. So we give each other that great gift of our time, and then that great gift of presence, to be fully present. The Buddhist teacher says, the quality of presence determines the quality of life. The quality of presence determines the quality of life. Mark Twain once said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them in proportion. I think that's good. So simply stated, we all worry about communication. And if you think about the age we're in now, communication is absolutely instant. But it becomes challenging when you start thinking about presence. How present is it that we can be? And it's a media that is valuable. It's a media that is tremendous kinds of opportunity in our world. It's all good. But we need to keep in mind this relationship building. It's built on a bedrock of listening, of trust, and respect. Years ago, I remember seeing a little editorial cartoon in the Bismarck Tribune, and it was the classic hold-up. One person, hands in the air, the other guy's has the gun, and he's pointing it to him. The fellow with the gun is saying, this is not a holdup. I need someone to talk to. James Hunter wrote a wonderful little book called The Servant. And I think this is right on. People must believe that you hear and you understand their legitimate needs. For those of you who have children, you know well not every want of your kid needs to be responded to. So there is a difference between need and wants, but that we indeed respond to legitimate needs and we have their interest at heart. There is no substitute for spending time with and listening to those you serve. There's no substitute. And Margaret Wheatley, an expert in organizational leadership, says we can change the world if we just start listening again. If we just start listening again. The second skill for the servant leader is that of influence. And here I go back to Hunter. I like his definition of leadership because he calls it a skill of influence, of influencing people to work enthusiastically toward a goal, toward a vision that has been identified for the common good, for the well-being of others. And then later he added that little thing about with character that inspires confidence. So we are not talking about the old model, the hierarchical model, the top-down, you do it because I told you to do it. What would a new model look like? It's interesting. I keep looking for some images of a new model. I think more and more people in religion, in business, and politics, they're talking about, to get an image, a model based on a vast net of relationships. Sister Ruth Fox, the Benedictine sister in Richardson, says a web circle. So think of a spider web with the leader in the center reaching out to all members, not top down. David Gergen, who served 6 presidents of the United States, he said, a president should see himself as the center of a web. This influence, this idea of persuading people, it's an exacting kind of skill, but it's the kind of skill that's so critical because the hope is that those you serve act out of their own motivation. You don't tell them what to do. You influence them, you inspire them, you invite them, so they act out of their own intuitive sense of rightness about the vision that you have articulated, the vision that you have brought forward. So you need a leader to listen respectfully to what's being said and not being said, to come to that vision and come to the point where they can say, you know what, here's where our company is today. Here's what we're going to, or should look like in 3 years, in 5 years, in 15 years. This is the servant leader inviting those they serve to imagine the future and then come to implementing the plan that will get them to those goals. Let me talk just a little bit. I'm looking at my watch and I'm getting nervous. I'm assuming that our dean will go like this or he'll just drag me off stage. So I'm willing to go, I'm listening. Okay. Surely the most dramatic and challenging illustration of servant leadership comes in the gospel. The icon of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. After his last meal with them, he gets up, takes a bowl, a towel, kneels down, and begins to wash their feet. And the protests were huge. How can you, our teacher and our master, how can you be washing our feet? They weren't objecting to feet washing, foot washing. Was very common in the culture, but you always had the slave do it. And if you couldn't afford the slave, you had the youngest kid in the family do it. That's who would wash the feet of the guest. And so, of course, they're objecting. So finally, Jesus said, do you understand what I'm doing? He said, you call me your teacher and Lord, and you should, because that is who I am. And if you, the teacher and Lord, has washed your feet, you should do the same for each other. I have set the example, and you should do for each other exactly what I have done for you. That icon of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples invites us to consider that third skill, that third essential skill. And that is asking ourselves, are we willing to let go of our need for power and control in our family, in our place of work? Are we open to multiple perspectives, or do we see community as uniformity? Are we creating an environment where everyone is welcome, where we can turn to one another in trust and know that we belong, that we have a home, that we are in community? And this is our place of work, within our family, within our civic community. Jesus' words, I have set the example, and you should do for each other exactly what I have done for you. I think the biggest challenge in all this, the biggest choice is, do I choose to serve or do I choose to be a servant leader? They're quite different. If you choose to serve, the interesting thing is you're still in control, because you're going to decide whom it is that you will serve and when you will serve him and when it's convenient for you. And you stay in charge. And your only worry is that you might lose your power. It's your only worry. But it bothers you because you want to be in control. It's the old top-down model. But if you hear that call to become a servant leader, it's an entirely different paradigm, because you give up control. It's a choice that frees you from being manipulated because you voluntarily choose to be taken advantage of. You are saying, I'm willing to listen first to whomever might need me, whoever might call on me. When we choose to become a servant leader, we become available and vulnerable to those who seek our service, like our customers, like our students, like our children and our colleagues. So it's a hard choice, but it frees us. It frees us to do for each other exactly what Jesus has done for us. So, a quick recap. Oh, there's Jesus, I forgot to. This is the recap. Another little recap. That was our framework. That was kind of where we started. The foundation, earning the trust of those we serve, giving direction to the future of the product or the service or the company, and finally, motivating to a service that builds community. And in that context, I brought forward just three skills. And as I mentioned, there are many more. But if we kind of take those skills and look at that framework, credibility is reinforced by the premier skill: listen first, be available, let yourself be vulnerable in behalf of others. The common vision is embraced through the skill of influence. It's not command control, it's influence, it's invitation, it's persuasion, it's encouragement. And then the essential service of the servant leader is to build community. Now, how do I know if I'm becoming a servant leader? I started with Greenleaf and I end with Greenleaf. Here's the test. Do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged of society? You've been fantastic. Thank you so much.